What you're looking at is one of the most disturbing pieces of footage I think I've ever come across. It's been sitting on this very platform for over a decade, and worst of all, it's just one of many videos that show this man restrained, punished, and tormented. What makes it even more unsettling is that the man in the videos became quite a prominent figure in the early 2010s, exposing an alleged cyber espionage and sabotage plot that targeted the United States. However, there's been no investigation into these videos, no newspaper report, and no statement from any authority about where he is now, almost as if he's been forgotten entirely. To understand who the man behind the videos is and what led to them being recorded, we first need to go back to the year 2006, where a plan would eventually put the White House, the Iranian embassy, and the Venezuelan government into the same sentence, as we look into one of YouTube's darkest mysteries. By 2006, Hugo Chavez had been running Venezuela for 7 years, and he'd spent most of them trying to build something. His argument was that the United States controlled Latin America economically and politically, and that the way to break that was for the countries in the region to line up against it. He called it anti-imperialism, and over the years he'd pulled in governments across the continent who agreed with him, with Cuba, already under American sanctions for 4 decades, as his closest ally in it. But the partner Chavez wanted most wasn't in Latin America at all. It was Iran, but they wanted something in return. As it turns out, its nuclear program had just been referred to the UN Security Council, and there was a real threat of American or Israeli strikes on its facilities. What Iran needed was warning of such an attack, which is difficult to get from 6,000 miles away, and considerably easier from a country that borders the United States. So on the 30th of July 2006, Chavez flew to Tehran to strengthen ties and was handed the High Medal of the Islamic Republic. Around the same time in Mexico City, a professor started holding meetings with high-ranking officials. His name was Francisco Guerrero Luteroth, and he taught in the Faculty of Engineering at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, otherwise known as UNAM. Luteroth was popular in the lecture theatre and controversial outside it, and he sat as a director in the faculty's Union of Professors. The meetings Luteroth started holding in 2006 were with staff from the Iranian, Venezuelan, and Cuban embassies in Mexico City, and what they were discussing was how to break into computer systems inside the United States. The systems that were eventually named were the White House, the FBI, the CIA, the Pentagon, the NSA, and nuclear facilities, both military and civilian. What they wanted out of them was passwords and access to the security systems that protect American nuclear plants. The issue, though, was that anything traced back to an embassy would be traced back to a government, and a break-in at a nuclear plant would be an act of war, so no embassy could put its own intelligence officers anywhere near it. What they needed were people with no formal connection to any of the 3 governments, people who could be disowned completely if it went wrong, and ideally, people who'd want to do it anyway, so that nobody had to be paid or pressured in a way that left a trail. This is where UNAM comes in. It's the largest university in Latin America, with tens of thousands of students. It also has a long and open history of hard-left political organizing among both students and staff, with student movements shutting the campus down more than once, meaning that in a single faculty, on a single campus, you had a large number of young people with serious technical training who already believed the United States was the problem. And as a director in that faculty's Union of Professors, Luteroth had access to every one of them. Among them was Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo Contreras, who was working for Luteroth at the time. Juan Carlos was born in Mexico City on the 23rd of November 1978 and was born into a middle-class family. He enrolled at UNAM in 1998 and studied psychology, and he was good enough at it to get onto the university's high academic performance program, though he never finished his thesis. What he did have was a knack for computers. He'd taught himself with friends before he ever got to university, and it's those skills that kept him there after the psychology stopped going anywhere. Eventually, he ended up working for Luteroth, writing training courses. That was the job on paper, though in practice, according to Juan Carlos, he was later made the middleman between the group of student hackers Luteroth had assembled and the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. According to Juan Carlos, what the group was doing was hacking, cyber intelligence, and what he called possible cyber terrorism at the request of the Venezuelan and Iranian embassies, and there was an order to it. Cyber attacks first, then physical attacks on American soil. Realizing what he'd been brought into and the innocent lives that were at risk, he started filming everything. It was a difficult task to do on his own, so he picked a handful of students himself, and they went in with him, posing as part of the hacking group they were actually there to document. They carried tiny microphones and hidden cameras into the meetings, some of which were being held inside the Venezuelan embassy itself. Over the next 4 years, they gathered dozens of hours of material, and getting caught with any of it would have meant arrest at the very least. One of those recorded was a woman called Livia Antonieta Acosta Noguera. Venezuela didn't have an ambassador in Mexico at the time, after a row between Chavez and the Mexican president Vicente Fox. So Luteroth brought Acosta Noguera in, who was the embassy's cultural attaché. On the recordings, she asks for the access keys to the security systems of American nuclear power plants, along with the systems protecting the United States atomic weapons arsenals.
Y no solamente eso, sino las claves. Falta una sección. Por eso también debería darlo. Sí, sí. No, sí.
On the Iranian side, it was the ambassador himself, Mohammad Hassan Ghadderi. According to a US State Department cable later published by WikiLeaks, he started working on expanding Iran's presence in the country almost immediately, including a plan to open a consulate in Tijuana on the American border. In the meetings, Ghadderi tells the students it's very important to know what the United States has in mind and whether they intend to attack Iran or not.
Now it's very important to know about what they have in mind, to attack Iran or not. Nuclear weapons of them.
The professor says locate the nuclear plants in the United States.
Yes, it's very good. Military and non-military.
Okay. We must ask a few which companies we can attack, because the systems are very, very weak in comparison of the military and CIA and National Security Agency are very, very easy to enter and, like a metaphor, put a bomb in there.
Digital bomb.
Yeah, digital bomb.
But then, in 2008, Luteroth died, which left Juan Carlos sitting in the middle of it, with 2 embassies still expecting results. More people then came in as time went on. A woman called Noemi Cabral, who Juan Carlos had known years earlier as a student, took on transcribing the tapes and became one of the group's points of contact with Acosta. And in July 2010, he brought in a 19-year-old law student called José Carlos García Tolentino, who took it a step further, getting on a plane to Iran in early 2011. He was there for months and continued recording in secret and documenting everything he could. Whilst in Iran, he also met one of the most wanted men in Latin America, Mohsen Rabbani. He'd served as cultural attaché at the Iranian embassy in Buenos Aires between 1994 and 1998. Argentine investigators accused him of involvement in the bombings of Jewish targets in the city in 1992 and 1994, which killed more than 100 people. By the time Tolentino met him, he was an Interpol fugitive, believed to be running a network of Iranian agents across Latin America from inside Iran. Shortly after, Tolentino was caught with the recording equipment. He got out unharmed and made it to the Spanish embassy in Tehran, and from there back to Mexico. Months after he got home, he and his family crossed the border into the United States and asked for political asylum, telling the American authorities they'd been threatened by Iranian agents in Mexico. Meanwhile, Noemi Cabral started approaching Mexican media outlets and political parties, looking for anyone who would use the material to shut the operation down. Juan Carlos says he took it to the Mexican authorities himself, but nothing happened. There was no investigation he was ever told about, and nobody ever got back to him. Then, in 2011, the recordings reached Univision, the largest Spanish-language broadcaster in the United States. Their investigative unit spent 7 months on it, and on the 8th of December, they aired an hour-long documentary called La Amenaza Irani, the Iranian threat. Over those 7 months, the team had gone through dozens of hours of the secret recordings, interviewed people who had been in the meetings themselves, and worked through documents that ranged from handwritten notes all the way up to internal federal reports. And it covered a lot more ground than what had been going on at UNAM, as the film set out to examine Iran's growing political, economic and military ties across Latin America, and what that expansion meant for the region and for the United States. But biggest of all was the secret audio and video recordings, in what Univision described as an Iranian-backed plan to attack the computer systems of the White House, the FBI, the CIA, and several nuclear power plants, with diplomats sitting in those meetings discussing it. And every second of that material had been gathered by Juan Carlos and the students he'd brought in with him. It went out at the worst possible moment for Iran too, because 2 months earlier, American prosecutors had charged an Iranian-American over a plot to pay the Mexican cartel Los Zetas to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington, so Washington moved on it. CNN picked it up, and so did the Washington Times, and Congress called for hearings into Iranian activity in Latin America. Livia Acosta, by then promoted to Venezuelan consul general in Miami, was declared persona non grata in January 2012 and was ordered to leave the country. Chavez called the expulsion unjust and immoral, saying she'd simply been doing her job, and shut the consulate. Then there's Gadiri. Univision tracked him down in Tehran, and he stood in front of a satellite camera and confirmed the meetings had happened. He then said the students had been the ones who proposed the attack, that his embassy turned them down, and that from the start, the hackers had struck him as CIA agents. So by early 2012, the group had done what they set out to do. The tapes were on national television, a diplomat had been expelled, and Congress was calling for hearings. But as soon as it started, things began to slow down. The hearings produced nothing anybody could point to. 3 members of the group were granted asylum in Vancouver, with an adjudicator accepting they had a well-founded fear of harm, and Tolentino ended up in an American detention center. And as for Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo, he stopped appearing anywhere at all. He wasn't in any interviews, follow-up statements or photographs in any language or country, and the man who'd spent years filming 3 embassies disappeared, without a trace. 3 whole years would go by with Juan Carlos's whereabouts remaining a mystery until May of 2015, where he reappeared, right here, on this very platform. This is one of many videos uploaded to a channel called Anti-Imperialistas, or Anti-Imperialists, created in 2015. Each one shows a man tied to a chain-link fence outside, in daylight, wearing a blue shirt. His eyes have been bandaged over, and his mouth has been covered with tape. And hanging around his neck, on a piece of string, is a large sheet of coloured card, written on by hand in marker pen. The message reads, "The sovereign and free countries in the world are the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Republic of Cuba, the Russian Federation, the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela, and the People's Republic of China. If you are a Zionist crusader, a member of the Bilderberg Group, the Bohemian Club, and/or any group of the Temple, if you do not respect the Islam values of the Cuban Revolution, the socialism of the 21st century, the struggle against imperialism, the fighting billionaires who make the unhappy world of the communist parties, and/or respect the values of our cultures. If you defend the interest of the United States of America and/or Europe and their companies, people, territory, security and welfare above our interest as sovereign countries, If you think you will receive a great reward in defending the interest of the United States of America and/or Europe and their company's security, if you criticize the re-establishment of religion of the Republic of Cuba and the United States of America, if you betray the trust or activities of sovereign countries, if you believe that anyone cares what happens to you, if you defend the interest of the United States and/or Europe, their companies, and their security, they will condemn you, and you will die like me. You will get sick like me. You will lose your wealth like me. Your family will hate you like me. Your loving being will die like mine. No one will care. No government or any company or any billionaire cares what happens to you like me. You will get extradited like me, and you will lose everything like me. The penultimate video shows a list of cities and their terrorist attacks, ranging from the 9/11 attacks in New York in 2001 to the Charlie Hebdo shooting in 2015, all written in the language of the country it happened in. There were 2 versions of these videos uploaded. The first parts had the signs written in Spanish, and the second in English. What stood out to me was the way the note was written. The message is written from the perspective of the blindfolded man, like as if he's put on display as a message, or rather, a warning. The final video is just a collection of images, showing him in the same tied-up and blindfolded position. We still aren't sure who the man really is, though this would change in the next upload. More videos were uploaded onto the channel on the 30th of May, with each one only being a couple of minutes long, and for the first time, we can actually see his face. The first video opens by calling itself a questionnaire, put to him on something called La Voz de Aristeo, the voice of Aristeo, and then it hands over to Aristeo to start asking. Aristeo starts with the money. He tells Juan Carlos they know about his identities, his bank accounts and his passports, and he asks him where the money is. Juan Carlos says it's been drained and there isn't any left. Then he reads him the charges: killing President Chavez, killing scientists on Iran's nuclear program, trying to assassinate the Castro brothers, sabotaging Putin's presidency, starting the war between Ukraine and Russia, murdering the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and attempting to murder the current Ayatollah, as well as an attempt on Maduro, sabotage against every one of those countries, and against China, and Bolivia, and Argentina. And then Aristeo asks him how he pleads, and he takes the charges one at a time, and Juan Carlos answers every single one the same way: not guilty.
Haremos el siguiente cuestionario en la voz de Aristeo a Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo. Adelante, Aristeo.
Sí. Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo Contreras. Sabemos de tus diferentes identidades, cuentas bancarias, pasaportes. ¿Dónde está el dinero restante?
Pues ya fue drenado. Ya no hay.
Bueno, esa es tu respuesta. Se te acusa de diversos delitos: haber matado al presidente Chávez, matar a científicos del programa nuclear iraní, intento de asesinato de los hermanos Castro, sabotear la presidencia de Putin en Rusia, generar conflictos entre Ucrania y Rusia, asesinato del líder de la Revolución Islámica de Irán e intento del actual Ayatollah, intento de asesinato contra Maduro y diferentes sabotajes contra estos países, además de China, Bolivia, Argentina. ¿Cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
Se te acusa del sabotaje y desprestigio a la UNAM. ¿Cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
Se te acusa del bloqueo de dinero de Irán, Venezuela, Cuba y Rusia. En este caso, ¿cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
Se te acusa de sabotaje y desprestigio a partidos políticos y al INE. ¿Cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
Se te acusa de sabotaje y desprestigio al gobierno de México. ¿Cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
¿Por qué sigues ayudando a Estados Unidos, Europa y sus aliados? ¿Hay dinero de por medio?
No, no lo hay.
¿Te sientes desilusionado por perderlo todo?
No.
Sabes que cualquiera te puede torturar y a nadie le importa.
Sí,
¿Sabes que no hay consecuencias de lo que te hagan?
sí. A las autoridades no les importa.
¿Sientes justo el uso de pentotal sódico y lo que hizo Víctor Cerda?
¿Cómo?
¿Sientes justo el uso del pentotal sódico y lo que te hizo Víctor Cerda?
Pues justo, no, bueno, quién sabe, es un método. Y lo que él hizo, pues es cosa de él.
¿Eres agente de alguna agencia nacional o extranjera?
No.
Then the next day, on the 31st of May, another collection of videos went up, and these ones follow the same format, though he's in a different position. He's sat on a sofa this time, with his head tilted slightly forward, and his eyes not quite open, and he answers the questions from there. But what's far more interesting about these is that he isn't on his own, as sat right next to him on that sofa is another man. This is the only time that anybody other than Juan Carlos is visible on camera. From what we can gather, this man is Ariesto, though we're never really given a full name through the videos. There was a couple of things that stood out to me. First was sound. At one point during the questioning, water can be heard running somewhere off camera, and as it does, Juan Carlos visibly winces, almost as if he's cringing at the thought of it.
Se te acusa del sabotaje y desprestigio a la UNAM. ¿Cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
Se te acusa del bloqueo de dinero de Irán, Venezuela, Cuba y Rusia. En este caso, ¿cómo te declaras?
No culpable.
Without context, his reaction may have seemed unusual, though videos uploaded after these would give us a much clearer indicator as to why he reacted in such a way. The second thing was his overall demeanor. In the first video, he sat upright and speaking clearly, coherent enough to answer a dozen charges one after another without stumbling. But as the videos progress, his speech gradually becomes more and more slurred, and his posture begins to give out, with him hunching further and further forward as the questioning continues. There could be any number of explanations for this, whether that be exhaustion or injury, or simply whatever had been done to him in between recordings. But buried in with the questions about Chavez and the Castros, his interrogators ask him something that makes one explanation stand out, as they ask him whether he considers the use of sodium pentothal fair.
¿Sientes justo el uso del pentotal sódico y lo que te hizo Víctor Cerda?
Pues justo, no, bueno, quién sabe, es un método. Y lo que él hizo, pues es cosa de él.
Sodium pentothal, otherwise known as sodium thiopental, is a barbiturate, and it's classified as an ultra-short-acting one, meaning that in small doses its hypnotic effect comes on quickly and then wears off within minutes. And for the better part of the last century, it was the drug most commonly referred to as truth serum. It works by relaxing the mind, lowering control, and making people talk more. Contrary to its name, it doesn't actually force people to tell the truth. Instead, it makes a person feel drunk or sleepy, making it hard to lie or tell right from wrong. This means it's possible that the drug they questioned him on was the very same one administered to him in between the videos. And as disturbing as this is, it pales in comparison to what was uploaded next. The titles on these videos don't leave much to the imagination. The first uploads, of which there are 7, are recordings of multiple interrogations as he's being waterboarded. And given the fact that he's seen wearing different pieces of clothing each time, it's safe to assume this was done over a span of multiple days. In the videos, there's a man's voice again, though this time it sounds like the other man is doing the questioning, rather than Ariesto. He's told that there's nothing he can do, and that however hard he fights, the battle is already lost. He's asked why he hasn't taken his own life yet, and asked whether there's any point in fighting a fight he's only going to lose. And throughout all of this, water is continuously poured over the soaking towel that's been wrapped around his face. The second collection of videos involves electroshocks. There isn't much to see, as the videos are mostly completely black or pointing to a specific place in the room, though the audio of him being shocked is fully audible in each of them. The video that sticks out the most is the third part, in which he's been instructed to show the markings on his upper chest, which I believe shows where the electrodes would have been placed. But mixed in among these videos is a message for one of the most notorious drug lords in Mexican history, which was uploaded in August of 2015.
Señor Gadiri, salam aleikum. Este es un comunicado para Joaquín Guzmán Loera. Estimado pariente, hemos podido concluir que uno de los responsables de tu anterior captura es Juan Carlos Muñoz Leva, y además es responsable de la muerte de Arturo Beltrán Leiva y de la captura de otros asociados a este negocio. Te comparto que ninguna autoridad lo protege ni está interesada en su caso. Además, está completamente solo. Ha sido un honor ayudar a tu causa de liberación y a los que están a favor de México, como Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Fin del comunicado.
What's especially interesting about the message itself is the names mentioned and who the message was intended for. Joaquín Guzmán Loera is the real name of El Chapo, who led the Sinaloa cartel and is believed to be responsible for the deaths of more than 30,000 people, and who was for years considered the most powerful drug trafficker in the world until he was eventually extradited to the United States and handed a life sentence. At the time this video went up, he had just escaped prison for a second time via a tunnel in July of that year. As for Arturo Beltrán Leiva, he ran the Beltrán Leiva cartel with his brothers after years as a senior member of Sinaloa, and whose organization moved cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine into the United States while being connected to the assassinations of a number of Mexican law enforcement officials. The Mexican government had him on its list of the 24 most wanted drug lords in the country, with a $2.1 million reward on him. And in December of 2009, the Navy traced him to an apartment complex in Cuernavaca, where roughly 200 Marines, 2 helicopters, and 2 small tanks surrounded the building. He was killed in a shootout that lasted 90 minutes. Then there's the last name in it, as after offering their help to El Chapo, they extend the same to those in favor of Mexico, and the example they give is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who would go on to become the president of Mexico 3 years later in 2018. But in 2024, the New York Times reported that American law enforcement had spent years examining allegations that people close to him had taken millions from cartels while he was in office. Though the inquiry was shelved, no formal investigation into the president himself was ever opened, and he publicly denied all of it. Much of that information had come from informants whose accounts were never confirmed, and no charges were ever brought. Another video was uploaded on the same day, though the message given here wasn't for someone in particular, but for Mexico and the wider Latin America.
Se convoca a la sociedad en general a una yihad contra los americanos que viven en México y toda Latinoamérica. Agradecemos a los señores Eligio Cerreño y Víctor Cerda por poner en duda el documental de la amenaza iraní. Agradecemos también a los estudiantes y egresados de la UNAM que trabajan en empresas americanas, europeas y japonesas por darnos información confidencial para volverlas inoperantes y atacarlas. Hemos descubierto que Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo pertenece a la dinastía sionista de los Rothschild además de su oscuro origen del Shah de Irán, que fue contrario a la revolución islámica. También es responsable de frenar operaciones no solo de cárteles, sino de la droga, sino de grupos liberadores como las FRAN, ETA y EPR. Karen Ramírez García es intocable como miembro de los ETA y Cártel de Sinaloa. Univisión y Washington Post y sus reporteros recibirán su merecido. Todos los que ayudaron a Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo también recibirán su merecido. Por último, Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo es operador del plan buitre.
Everything on this channel up to this point could be explained as a record being kept, as footage of an interrogation that somebody happened to upload. But these two videos were clearly made for an audience. Whoever was uploading these had stopped documenting and started recruiting, and all while it was still going up, more channels began to appear. The first channel to follow was called Mario Hernandez, and it was created on the 27th of June 2015, while the first channel was still uploading. On it are 32 videos, which is the exact same number of videos as the first channel, only these ones aren't interviews or interrogations at all. Every single one of them is a confession, and there's nothing to look at on any of them either, as they're just a black screen with audio. And on every one, you hear the unidentified man ask whether he did something, or whether he carried out a particular act, and then a second voice, who we can only assume is Juan Carlos, answering yes.
¿Mataste al presidente Chávez? ¿Intentaste matar al presidente Maduro?
Sí.
¿Intentaste desestabilizar a Argentina por el caso Nisman?
Sí.
¿Intentaste sabotear las negociaciones del programa nuclear pacífico iraní?
Sí.
What's interesting to note is that in the previous videos on the other channel, he answered not guilty to everything. He denied all of it, repeatedly, across two separate sets of videos, while being terrorized. And then on this channel, he just agrees to everything. We can't really see what they've done to him, or what they're doing to him. It may have been the truth serum that made him delirious and say yes, or they may have forced a false confession out of him. Another interesting thing to note is that these confessions were given a channel of their own. There's no other content on here. Whoever was doing this already had somewhere to put footage, and they'd been putting it there for a month, and yet the confessions went somewhere separate, under a name that has nothing to do with him, and nothing to do with anti-imperialism either. This channel left us with more questions than it did answers, and after the 32 confessions were uploaded, everything stopped. For about a year, there was nothing. Then, sometime in 2016, another channel appeared. This time, under the name Ariesto Santiago Cortés. As for the videos themselves, they're quite horrifying to say the least. Juan Carlos has lost a devastating amount of weight, to the point where you can make out the shape of his ribs and his shoulders, and he's covered in burns, in cross-shaped brandings that run across both his arms and his legs. His arms have been pulled up and outwards, and fixed to a wooden bar above his head, leaving him stood there with them stretched out on either side of him. And throughout all of it, he doesn't say a single word. He just stares into the camera while the cameraman moves around him, showing off the restraints. What's interesting to note is that there's multiple variations of this video, with him restrained in some sort of makeshift bedroom or kitchen, but the position and angle in which he's restrained changes, with some even showing him being restrained to the entrance of an outside garden area. Then there's the sheets of paper, as taped to his hands and hanging down on either side of him are two large printed documents, and they're dense, running to dozens of lines each, and they carry the same accusations we've heard throughout this entire video, calling him a crusader, a Templar, and a Zionist, and they issue the same warning, which is that anybody who stands in their way is going to end up exactly like this. And then we see a long list of names, a list of people that whoever wrote these documents wanted to thank, though we'll look at those in closer detail later on. The final channel that's been found was created on the 15th of March 2018 under the name Gloria Uribe Medina. There's 2 videos on it, though as far as I can tell, it's the same video uploaded twice. What makes it disturbing though is the audio, as there's clearly 2 other people in that room with him, a man and a woman. At one point, the woman says something about not putting the lighter near, and moments after that, Juan Carlos can be heard groaning in pain. Exactly what they were doing to him is impossible to say from what's on screen, though given the cross-shaped branding marks that were displayed all over his body on the previous channel, and given that whoever ran that channel was publishing those marks deliberately, my suspicion is that this is a recording of them branding him. These are, at least that we know of, the last videos of him anywhere. Searching his name on YouTube brings up nothing else. No other channels with similar names, no similar video titles, and no similar descriptions. This leaves us with 2 possibilities. Either these final uploads were old copies of footage that had been filmed for the previous channel back in 2016 and simply posted late, or, up until at least the middle of March 2018, Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo was still alive, meaning he'd been enduring all of this for years. These videos have been sat on YouTube and the internet for over a decade, and in all that time, nobody has ever been able to confirm the contents of the channels. That being said, I think the reality is there's 3 possibilities here, and I'll go through each one, starting with what I believe is the least likely reality. The first idea is that it's all fake. Nothing in these videos can be definitively proven, and there's no way to demonstrate that anyone was genuinely tortured in that room rather than performing it for a camera. So it's entirely possible the whole thing was fabricated. As for why anybody would go through so much trouble, the most sensible version I could come up with is that it was staged to protect him. If the people looking for Juan Carlos believed he was already suffering and already had nothing left, then they might have decided to leave him alone. But I don't buy it. For one thing, there's the sheer amount of effort involved in pulling something like this off across 4 channels, 60+ videos, and 3 years. For another, most of these videos have barely been watched, which makes it hard to argue they were ever uploaded in the hope of reaching anyone. And beyond all of that, the brutality of what's on them is difficult to look at and even harder to fake. This brings us to the second theory, which is that the man in these videos was never Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo at all, and that whoever is chained to that fence is somebody else entirely, with his name simply being attached to it. And I'd argue this one falls under the same bracket of being unprovable. But again, I struggle with this one, as the man in the interviews looks strikingly similar to the photographs of Muñoz Ledo that are online, and his voice sounds like the same voice too.
La situación aquí es muy particular, y es el detener las actividades que estos señores están haciendo dentro y fuera de la UNAM.
¿Sientes justo el uso del pen total, sódico y lo que te hizo Víctor Cerda?
Pues justo, no, bueno, quién sabe, es un método. Y lo que él hizo, pues es cosa de él.
Which leaves us with the third possible explanation, which is that everything on those 4 channels is exactly what it appears to be. That the man who spent 4 years secretly recording 3 embassies, who put the material on American television and got a diplomat expelled from the country, was taken, drugged, interrogated, drowned, electrocuted, branded and burnt, and made to hold up sheets of paper thanking the people he'd exposed. And if that's what happened, then there's only one question left. Where is he now? With nothing official to go on, I went back to the videos themselves and rewatched every video I could find to see if I could find any clues that may have gone unnoticed after all these years. And one of the first things I noticed was something unusual in the first uploaded videos, specifically the 10 warning videos. The naming and description seems to be identical across them all. However, at the very end of each description, it credits multiple people. It says the videos were made by Raquel del Toro, with the aid of Consuelo Contreras and Rebecca Muñoz Ledo. Raquel del Toro had already appeared in the videos once, though it took a second pass through the waterboarding footage before I picked it up. In the second video, before any of the accusations about Chavez or the Castros or the Iranian nuclear program, the voice off camera wanted to know where the papers that Raquel del Toro had notarized have gone. Juan Carlos says he doesn't know, and when he's asked whether he has them in his possession, he says he doesn't. Only after that do the questions turn political.
¿Sabes dónde están los papeles que notarió Raquel del Toro?
No, no los tengo.
¿Los tienes en tu poder?
No, no los tengo.
¿Tú protegerás a Hillary Clinton y Jeff Bush?
Lo mío.
Searching that name up online brought up two things. The first is a student review site where people can rate their lecturers. On it, there's a Raquel del Toro Calero listed at UNAM in Mexico City, the same university Juan Carlos studied at, that Luteroth taught at, and that every one of those student hackers was recruited out of. The second thing is a court record. In 2015, a Raquel Teresa del Toro Calero filed what's known in Mexico as a direct amparo, which is a federal challenge you bring when a ruling has already gone against you, and she brought hers against a chamber of the Federal Court of Tax and Administrative Justice. It's listed as Case 262 of 2015. The proceedings ran from that April into the following month, and she lost it, stating that the Justice of the Union does not shield or protect her. The Anti-Imperialistas channel was created on the 22nd of May 2015, and 9 days after that, her name was sitting underneath 10 videos of a man chained to a fence. I also found one more piece of footage on the channel. It's a photograph of a document, more specifically, a citizen's arrest document for extradition, written out in Spanish and then again in English underneath, carrying its own reference number that dates back to 2011. It states that whoever carries out the Russian, Cuban, Iranian, and Venezuelan extradition will be paid $225 million American dollars, and that none of the people signing it face any restriction on trading or traveling anywhere in the world. At the bottom are two signatures, given on behalf of the sovereign governments of Cuba, Russia, Venezuela, Iran, and China, and next to each one is a full set of inked fingerprints pressed into boxes. The first of those signatures belongs to Raquel Teresa del Toro Calero, which is the name credited in the descriptions, the name they were demanding papers over, and the same name appearing in the court documents. The second belongs to a man called Carlos Najera Taledos, who appears nowhere else across any of this. Above the signatures, there's two paragraphs of thanks. The first thanks CIEDO, which is Mexico's organized crime prosecution unit, for infecting Juan Carlos with tuberculosis during the waterboarding and for the consequences to his health. The second thanks 4 women, named in full, 3 of whom carry his surnames, for their cooperation at a house in Mexico City at 8 o'clock in the evening on Friday the 12th of December 2014, and it states that they are in agreement with his extradition. Their names are Consuelo Contreras Diaz, Rebecca Judith Muñoz Ledo Contreras, Patricia Griselda Muñoz Ledo Contreras, and Diana Donaci Muñoz Ledo Contreras. And at the very end there's an address, which takes us to here, though unfortunately this is where the road ends. I couldn't find any online reference to this address outside of the document. I did look into whether anything on the document holds up, and Mexico does have a form of citizen's arrest, but it only covers detaining somebody caught in the act and handing them straight to the nearest authority. Mexican law also covers what happens when 2 countries want the same man, which is that the government has to choose one of them, so a joint Russian, Cuban, Iranian and Venezuelan process couldn't happen even in theory. Mexico has no extradition treaty with Iran and none with Russia. But aside from all that, I can't imagine any legitimate extradition form thanking people for infecting someone with tuberculosis. I've also seen people online place him all over the country, with one suggestion putting him as far as Yucatan, though I'm not sure I agree with any of it. Something that stood out to me going back through the footage was the sound of aircraft. In so many of the videos there's a plane going over, and they're loud, and in a few of them, such as the warning videos, the recording only seems to begin once the noise has cleared, as though whoever was holding the camera had been stood there waiting for it to pass before starting again. And then again, in the videos uploaded to Ariesteo's channel, multiple planes can be heard flying over. Mexico City's international airport sits inside the city itself and deals with roughly 1,000 flights a day on average, with runways running on a northeast to southwest diagonal so that arrivals come in low across the boroughs underneath, and the address given in the extradition form lines up quite closely to that flight path, with it being about a 15-minute drive from the airport. This, of course, doesn't confirm an exact location, but given the frequency of the flights in their videos, I'd argue that their videos were recorded quite close to the airport, or at the very least around the flight paths. Then there's the names on those printed sheets from 2016, which start to sort themselves into groups once you look them up. The first is made up of the people those recordings exposed. Livia Antonieta Acosta Noguera and Mohammed Hassan Gadiri Abiane were both sat in the meetings Juan Carlos and his students were filming, and Mohsen Rabbani is the man Jose Carlos Garcia Tolentino got on a plane to Iran to get in front of. After that comes his university. They thank Jose Ramon Naro Robles, who was running UNAM at the time, and Luis Raul Gonzalez Perez, who had been the university's general counsel before going on to head Mexico's National Human Rights Commission. They also thank Lucy Radel Martinez, a professor with close to 50 years behind her in the Faculty of Psychology, which is the faculty Juan Carlos studied in. Then there's the politics. Ricardo Anaya Cortés, Alejandra Barrales Magdaleno, Dante Alfonso Delgado Ranauro, Yadkol Polevinsky Gurwitz, Alejandro Esquer Verdugo, and Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who between them are senior figures from the PAN, the PRD, and Movimiento Ciudadano and Morena, covering every major party in the country. López Obrador turns up there for the second time across these channels, having already been named in that message to El Chapo the year before. Which leaves us with Ariesteo. Out of everybody involved in this, he's the only one we ever actually see, sat on that sofa beside Juan Carlos while a third person films the pair of them, and the only one whose voice gets introduced by name. He's also the only person in the whole of this who never gets a surname. That surname exists in exactly one place, which is the title of the third channel, and searching Ariesteo Santiago Cortés does return a real man in Mexican press reports, though in a completely different part of the country, with no connection to Juan Carlos, to UNAM, or to any of the embassies. So, where does this leave us? I think it's important for me to stress here that I'm not pointing fingers, nor am I suggesting that anyone named had anything to do with what happened to him. Nobody has ever been accused of it, and nobody has ever been charged. I've caught myself more than once trying to shrink all of this into something ordinary, but I think that's trying to do the impossible. Mixed in between accusations of causing the death of Chavez, for starting the war between Ukraine and Russia, and for sabotaging the intelligence services of 5 different countries, are questions on notarized documents and torture videos supposedly made by his own family members and friends. I think the reality is that we're never going to know for certain whether the man in those videos was Juan Carlos Muñoz Ledo, and if it was him, whether he ever made it out, though given the complete lack of updates in almost a decade, it's hard to imagine that he's still alive. All we're left with is nothing but fragments of a man's final moments, scattered across multiple channels, left sitting on YouTube for somebody to stumble across.